So, I have a bit of a confession to make. One that's probably going to confuse and upset a lot of people. But it has to be done. After the last video, I owe it to editor me to make something a little spicy. So, here goes. I categorically dislike romance in fiction. I'm not just talking about a certain type of romance, or romantic subplots, or the romance genre. I'm talking about all fictional romance. Whenever I see two people in a story who have romantic feelings for one another, I think to myself, man, I wish this wasn't in the story. I'm not kidding, and I'm not exaggerating. I can watch the most heartbreaking and emotional love story of all time and feel nothing. I've learned not to talk about it because I don't want to ruin other people's fun. It seems like it's such a universal thing for people to like it when fictional characters fall in love, but not for me. 99% of the time, I feel that I would enjoy a story more if any romance was removed.
Is this a kissing book?
For most of my life, I chalk this up to personal taste. I'm just a weirdo who hates love. But then, once I started studying the craft of fiction more seriously, I started picking up on some patterns in the way romantic relationships are portrayed in stories, and a wider issue became clear to me. Over the years, I've come to notice that the overwhelming majority of romantic relationships in fiction are unhealthy. Fiction, by its very nature, pushes characters into bad and toxic relationships. In short, fictional romance is broken. And today, I explain how. Okay, so I know I'm making some wild claims here, but I wouldn't be saying this if I couldn't back it up. How can almost every fictional romance be bad? I bet that right now, you're thinking of your favorite fictional couple and saying to yourself, this couple isn't toxic. And sure, maybe that particular couple isn't. Maybe the one you like is one of the good ones. Sure, let's put that to the test then. So, toxic couples fight a lot, right? They disagree and have a hard time resolving problems in a mature and reasonable way. That wouldn't happen to describe your favorite couple, would it? Do they spend a large portion of the story fighting, arguing, acting petty and selfish? Toxic couples also lie to each other. They keep big secrets from each other because of a lack of trust instead of communicating openly. Does your favorite fictional couple lie and keep secrets? And by any chance, do those secrets and lies play a fairly large role in the plot of the story? And toxic couples are often one-sided. Sometimes, a person becomes romantically interested in someone else and doesn't really see them as a person. They see the other person more as a prize to be won, and keep trying to win them over at all costs. Does your favorite fictional couple fit into this? Did one member of the pair obsess over the other a little too hard? Maybe they even confessed their feelings and got rejected multiple times, but refused to take no for an answer and eventually wore the other person down? Yeah. Some of the biggest and most popular fictional couples ever sure do spend a lot of time fighting, disagreeing, and generally not being on the same page. Maybe even a lot of couples you like. When you look at media in aggregate, characters in a relationship spend a wildly disproportionate amount of time being horrible to their partners. Why is that? The answer is surprisingly simple. Stories need conflict. That's how it works. In order for a story to exist, you need a problem for a character to overcome. And when the main focus of a story is romance, there needs to be conflict within that romance. A story about a happy, well-adjusted couple would be really boring in most cases. Even if a fictional couple is mostly good, the story probably spends a lot of time depicting moments when they aren't. So for those of you who are sitting there all smug because your favorite couple passed all the tests so far, let's do one more. How much of your couple's story actually shows them being a couple? By any chance, do the characters spend most of the story pining over each other? And then by the time they finally confess their feelings and get together, the story is just about over? And even if the story does keep going, their relationship isn't the main focus of the plot anymore, is it? The laws of story physics dictate that characters are not allowed to be happy together while the story is running. And once you notice that, it makes romance-centric stories really frustrating as an audience member. The most extreme example of this I can think of is Ross and Rachel from Friends. They're two characters who are romantically interested in each other, but over 10 seasons of TV, the story never allows them to be in a stable and happy relationship. Let me give you a quick timeline of events if you haven't seen the show or it's been a while. So in the first season, Ross has a crush on Rachel, but he can't work up the nerve to tell her. Eventually, Rachel starts to realize that Ross likes her, and that she has feelings for him too. But in the same episode that she finally decides to confess her feelings, Ross decides that Rachel will never love him back and starts dating Julie. Then Rachel's sad for a while because Ross is with someone else, until Ross realizes that Rachel is in love with him. So he makes a list of pros and cons for dating Julie versus Rachel. But Rachel finds the list and is incredibly insulted, and it all falls apart. They finally work out all their issues and start dating for like a season. But then we get to the infamous "We Were on a Break" episode, where Ross and Rachel have a huge fight, and Ross mistakenly thinks Rachel broke up with him, so he immediately goes and hooks up with another girl, and Rachel gets mad at him for cheating, and they break up for real. They then spend like 5 seasons full of unresolved feelings for each other, where they both keep saying they don't want to date anymore, except whenever one of them starts dating somebody else, the other one gets insanely jealous but won't say anything. They hook up a handful of times, and then end up regretting it every time. There was that time they got drunk married in Vegas and had to go through all kinds of awkward to get an annulment. Rachel and Joey date for a while, even though it made no sense. Then they have a one-night stand, and Rachel gets pregnant, so they spend the final season raising a baby together and bickering about it the entire time. Until finally, in the very last episode, they put aside all their differences and get back together for good. And then the show ends. It's so frustrating to watch. These are two people who are clearly in love, but the writers of the show keep contriving ridiculous circumstances and petty arguments to keep them apart. Because the second the two of them are happy together, there can be no more show. When I try to explain to other people why I don't like romance in stories, sometimes I like to say that to me, every fictional couple looks like Ross and Rachel. They're an extreme example, I know, but this is what plays out on a smaller scale in almost every romance story ever created. My issue with fictional romance is that it always makes me too aware of the hand of the author. If you're not familiar with that term, it's basically whenever you notice that the author is trying to push the story in a direction that doesn't feel natural. Characters might behave out of character, or there might be a lot of convenient coincidences, all in the service of forcing the story forward where the author wants it to go. When the audience becomes aware of the hand of the author, it makes the world of the story no longer feel real, and it's way harder to stay invested. Every time I see a fictional couple getting along well, I think to myself, okay, where's the big fight that's gonna ruin this? I know it's coming, come on and do it already. To some extent, everything I've just described can also apply to any plotline, not just romantic ones. Stories need to have conflict. No matter what, you can always count on things going wrong for the protagonist all the way up to the end. Like, let's say we have a story about a character who's trying to win a big competition. If we're at the halfway point and they're doing really well, we know that something bad is coming their way that'll mess things up and make it hard for them to win before the end. All stories work like that. But the thing about romance plots that are so specifically frustrating to me is that they deal almost exclusively with internal conflict, emotions that the characters have. Generally, fictional characters are supposed to feel like real people, with rounded personalities and complex thoughts and feelings. But when a story has to derive conflict from romance, that means that characters' emotional states are dictated by what the plot needs at that moment. When you can predict, like clockwork, when a character will suddenly blow up with anger at the one person they care about most, they feel a lot less real. That's especially true when the reason for the fight is something really petty, which it usually is. So many times I've seen stories that made me think, wow, I'm starting to doubt that these two people ever loved each other if they were this willing to turn on each other. They're never able to just talk things out like real people. It's always jumping straight to the worst possible assumptions. One of my least favorite tropes, maybe ever, is the overheard misunderstanding. You know the one, where one character is talking, and another character comes over to eavesdrop, and they end up hearing a tiny bit of the conversation that sounds really terrible out of context, and then they run away before they can hear the rest. Like, setting aside the fact that the timing is always way too perfect, this is not how any human would react in this scenario. If this were you, wouldn't you have at least a moment of doubt where you would think to yourself, no, there's no way this person I loved and trusted would say that about me, and keep listening to find out more? Or recognize that the other person made a mistake and consider forgiving them for what they said? At the very least, you feel curiosity about what else they're going to say. I don't think there's a single human being on the planet who would turn down the chance to eavesdrop on somebody talking smack about them behind their back. But no, every time the character jumps straight to, you meant every word and I hate you, because the story is at the 3/4 mark and it needs something bad to happen before the climax. Stories need to have conflict at specific times, and in love stories, the two characters need to hit certain emotional beats at certain times, like they were programmed to do it instead of reacting like real humans would. And at least to me, This makes almost every love story feel in some way artificial. I think part of what contributes to all of this is that a lot of writers set out wanting to write a love story. You know, in real life, romance happens naturally between two people who have chemistry. When someone writes a love story, though, they usually start with the concept of two people in love, and then they create the characters. You might think that two characters who were literally designed for each other would be perfectly compatible every time, but the reality is that fictional characters can take on a life of their own. And even when a writer is trying their absolute hardest, two people won't usually fit together that neatly. Creating two compatible characters gets even harder when you add in the fact that there has to be a built-in reason for them to fight, for all the reasons I already talked about. And all that is assuming that the writer is actually putting in the effort. There are also tons of stories out there that spend almost no time at all showing us why these characters make a good couple. They just take it as a given that the male and female lead will end up together because heteronormativity. That's how you get all these stories where there's a male main character and then a female love interest character with the personality of a lamp, whose only purpose in the story is to be a trophy for the man to win.
Busy. Yeah, but what is that? It's a major award.
Bad romance is everywhere in stories. There's so much that can go wrong when writing a love story. That's including things I didn't even mention, like stories that romanticize abuse, the idea of a happily ever after that makes it seem like the couple will never fight again, or reality shows that manufacture romantic drama to turn real people into toxic caricatures. So, is there any hope? Do I think there's any way to create a good, healthy, believable romance? And I'm talking about it in terms of my personal tastes, because again, it seems like I'm the only person who sees it this way. And the answer is yeah, it's totally possible. The simplest way to tell a love story without manufactured conflict within the couple is to make it a forbidden romance. In other words, make a story where two people are in love, but outside factors are trying to keep them apart. That way, the conflict is all external, so you don't need to force in a reason for the couple to fight. And kind of an offshoot of that is tell a queer love story. That adds so many complications. Whether it's one person not knowing what gender their crush is attracted to all the anxieties of being in the closet. All that emotional turmoil is bound to feel way more meaningful than all the petty stuff hetero characters tend to fight over.
You ask out a girl and she says no. Big deal. Nothing happens. Maybe your ego's a little bruised, but I ask out the wrong girl and bam, I'm a town pariah.
Finally, and this one is a bit harder, don't start writing a story with the intent of making two specific characters fall in love. Instead, just make cool and complex characters, start writing, and then see which ones naturally develop chemistry. This isn't always feasible, but when it works, it works. I will always respect the show Community for putting Jeff and Britta together in the first season, and then deciding those two weren't a good match and pivoting to Jeff and Annie. When you get down to it, mapping the complexity of human relationships onto the structure of fiction means that things are always going to feel a little off. You can make a love story feel believable. I just think it takes more work than a lot of writers realize, or it's more work than they're willing to put in. And I'm being this harsh because I care. I'm not a sociopath who hates love, I promise. I'm not rooting for love stories to fail. All I want is for more writers to understand some of these pitfalls and do more to get me invested when they write a love story of their own.
You complete me.
You had me at hello.
Love it.